the summer university is going to be looking, as we know, at these 5 main topics. Does the panel think that we have yet the institutions in the right form that we need them internationally for us globally to manage those various different challenges that we face? The UN, NATO, for example, if the US is beginning to talk about, is beginning to question that, is that fit for purpose? Is that going to have to change to deal with the security issues we're now going to face, which include cyber, which include maybe not only Russia but also other large countries? The WHO, can that deal with the flow of disease, the migration? Do we actually have the right capacity to deal with those kind of problems? And the institutions we have, do they need to be reforged? Damien.
I mean, I think they need to be permanently reforged, and even that list, which I mean, a relatively small cross-section of the various international institutions that need to work. I mean, let me pick 2 that I know most about. The first of which is NATO, which from a European perspective looks like, oh my God, the Americans are pulling out. I have to say, for all, I'm not an admirer of Trump for 100 obvious reasons, but nevertheless, the Americans sort of have a point that nobody, well, apart from Britain and there's one other, is it Latvia? Is the other, sorry, Estonia, sorry. Showing.
You'll disagree on who it is.
Sorry, Greece does. Greece does. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, not very many, and no other big country in Europe actually hits the 2% target. So I think both, as it were, wings of NATO need to get their act together. I can't imagine any US president, even Trump, actually wanting to pull out of NATO, but I do think that he has injected into the bloodstream of American debate something that will stay there, which is that, why are they spending all their money on our defence, as it might be seen? And I think they have a point. On immigration, I think that the international institutions are nothing like strong enough to cope with what is likely to be one of the huge challenges of the next 20 years. Someone in this room will know off the top of their head the figure I don't, of the percentage of babies in the world that will be born in sub-Saharan Africa over the next 30 years. It is something like 40-50% of all babies in the world are going to be born in sub-Saharan Africa. And every country in that region is going to have to grow at some phenomenal figure, something like 7% a year for 2 decades to create the jobs for all those new citizens they have. It's not going to happen. What are they going to do? Large numbers of them are going to try to come to Europe. It is almost certain. And I don't think the EU, still less the UK government, has any idea of how to deal with that. And so, I mean, whether that needs an institutional change or simply a degree of political will, and the truth is there will be populist pressures to solve it by getting tougher, by stopping boats coming across the Mediterranean and all of that, which will mean many deaths. Or there's a generous way of doing it, which involves massively trying to improve the economies in those countries. And I think that leap to do something generous will be very, very difficult to achieve politically, but is absolutely essential. I'm afraid I don't know enough about international healthcare policy. I'm sure Saeed does.
I don't know enough about international healthcare policy, but I think it depends. I think one thing is about Heraclitus is, and it's interesting because I used Heraclitus as my PhD, which was about radical change in post-communist economies. The only constant is change. And what that means is that these institutions have to continue to change and continue to adapt to meet the challenges. And I think one of the issues here is, for example, let's look at migration. It's not necessarily the institutions, but actually it's the sort of the look at how you look at the Dublin Convention and Dublin rules. Because the rules are actually quite simple, but actually it's more complicated in its implementation. The rules are that you claim asylum in the first safe country you land in. What you are seeing is people land in one country. Italy and Greece have sadly spared the sort of the burden, most of the burden, and understandably, that's why they're upset, because we talk about European solidarity, but they feel that people haven't been sharing the burden for all those reasons. And actually what happens, you see people moving across, anyone coming from France to the UK actually is not claiming asylum, unless they're claiming asylum from France, which would be a bit unfair. Actually, they are now considered migrants, and I think we have to work those rules out. The other thing we didn't do, there was a moment in history when Juncker said at the time that actually let's get together collaboratively and we have to work this out. And then when we started trying to tell countries what they should do, we didn't understand enough about those countries. A sort of one size fits all. You must take so many people. One of the things that I find fascinating is, it's very difficult. It's very easy for someone like me, comes from the UK, where we're used to people from different countries and we've got an international perspective, and France in many ways and other countries. But if you're from, say, rural Poland or rural Latvia, and you've never seen, bizarrely, a dark face, or you've never seen the lady with a headscarf, and also you've never had colonies, you've got to manage integration and migration very, very carefully. And what sometimes some of the Poles say to me, and the Latvians, and those who will speak to me quite civilized face to face, but actually tell me what they're worried about was, we've never been used, first of all, to mass migration like this, or numbers like this. And secondly, we didn't have colonies, so we didn't have these international networks you have of these people coming from these countries. And thirdly, we are scared about how to integrate. We don't know how to integrate. And we're scared of, example, women walking up fully veiled, for example. It's just different for us, and we don't know how to integrate that. And frankly, rather than trying to deal with it, we'd just rather say no. And I think we've never really understood they're not necessarily racist because they want to be. It's actually ignorance and no experience of having had that sort of contact. We take it for granted, particularly in London, but elsewhere, that if I hear someone speaking another language on the underground, I know they'll probably speak English to me if I chat to them. But in other countries, getting used to new migrants for the first stage, and we didn't hold their hands enough or help them. Instead, we said, you have to take so many, and you have to take so many. And we also didn't ask countries themselves what they would do to help. Some countries said we'd rather pay some money to help settle people closer to home. And I think the complication of all this is that we've all got to take some responsibility as well. It's not only the pull factors, but actually we've got to think about the long-term implications of any intervention, any foreign policy intervention. We can't just say, we've got to think about exit strategies, but also, I'm not saying our foreign policy interventions were wrong, but clearly even if you remove an unpleasant regime, but removing an unpleasant regime leads to instability, that will lead to people wanting to leave that country. Where are they going to go? And we didn't think that through enough when we made some of these interventions.
That seems like a perfect place to end it. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen.